Welcome to the Storytellers, the radio show and podcast that features those who choose to leave their mark on the world through the art of story. I'm your host, Grace Sammon. I look forward to our time together today. Now, let's meet our storyteller.
Welcome to the Storytellers. I'm Grace Sammon, a Canadian by birth, a high school dropout, and a mother at the age of 17. Lily Iona MacKenzie supported herself as a cocktail waitress and as a stock girl. She also briefly did time on as a longshoreman, where she almost had her legs broken. She founded and managed a homeless shelter, co-created the Story Shoppe, which was a weekly television show for children, and also earned 2 master's degrees. In addition to her books of poetry, she's written 4 novels, which we'll have the opportunity to talk about today. And she currently teaches creative writing at the University of San Francisco's Fromm Institute for Lifelong Learning. Lily, thank you and welcome for the microphone today.
Thank you, Grace, for such a great introduction.
Well, I have to be honest with you. I don't know where to begin. I think we could spend the entire episode just on your life story, which I think is also, however, reflected in your wonderful books. Your books each have a theme for me that is near and dear to my heart, which is of resilience, of we are never done. So start with your story and then talk about your books and how those themes get interwoven.
Well, with my story, I started out on these Canadian prairies, and this was, I'm 81 now. So this was back in 1940 when I was born. And there was something, I was fortunate to have spent several years on a farm. And those years really taught me so much, that I'm still honoring in my life, in terms of you have to be present every moment. You have to be responsible to every creature on the farm with you, as well as to the land. And so I learned how to work. When I was really young, I had to help my stepfather gather the eggs, and not only had to gather them but clean them, and that was a mess.
And it's a very messy job. They don't come the way they come in the crates.
No, they don't. And since we used to take them to the farmers market in the city, it was really important that they were clean. And so, I also, fed the animals and cleaned out their stalls. And so there was, and in addition to, helping my mom in the kitchen, cooking and canning and cleaning and so on. So from the time I was really young, I had to work. And that has stayed with me. And I think as a writer, you really have to have that kind of grit, because writing novels, at least the way I write them, it takes a long time. And it's like entering a relationship with a person. You have to commit to that relationship for who knows how long it will take, in order to deepen it. So I learned a lot of those abilities, I think, really young, and I'm grateful for that period of time.
So I think that shows in your writing, because your characters are wonderful, and I want to talk about those in a moment, but so is your sense of place. I like to draw, when I write, a strong sense of place, and you have Canada and California and Mexico all in your books as very vibrant, almost characters. Would you agree with that?
And Venice.
Yes, and Venice.
Italy, yes.
I can't believe I forgot that, one of my favorite cities.
Yes. No, I think that place is a character in all of my novels. It plays a tremendously important, part of what happens with the characters, in particular. The interaction between character and place is constant. I can't think of a novel where that isn't true. So yes, place is extremely important.
with your books, I have such a strong sense of women's fiction. Your characters are very, very powerful women. And I always love to be transparent on the show because you pitched me to come on and you opened up your email to me and it said, "Hi, I'm a high school dropout. I was a mother at 17, and I'd really like to be on your show." And you exposed my prejudices in ways that I am delighted that they get exposed.
Oh, say
Because,
more. Oh.
well, no, I just loved it because, first of all, I was delighted that I got pitched for the Storytellers, but you pointed out to me the essence of what I like to convey in my writing. I had no idea, by the way, you're 81, you look fabulous. And just this sense of this is where we come from. And that's so much of what we find in women's literature. So talk to me about that.
Well, when I was growing up in the 40s and 50s, it was a really major transitional time for everybody on the earth, but especially for women. And, we grew up with red and green lights flashing at us at that time. There were some openings, but there were still lots of impediments in front of us. And so naturally in my novels, I've created women who are dealing with social situations that, draw out the best in them. I hope it draws out the best. But we're also dealing with each character is particular and different in each of my novels. So I was exploring, with each character, what kinds of dynamics that she was going to be dealing with as we go through the narrative. So, it starts, my first novel that was published is Fling. And that's the one that I laugh the most when I read it.
With Bubbles, who's 90 years old, right?
Bubbles. And so, it starts because, so the two main characters are Bubbles, who's 90, and her daughter Feather, who was, a hippie. She teaches art, and she lives in Marin County in California. So it starts then with the daughter returning to Calgary to help her mother, Bubbles, celebrate her 90th birthday. But when she arrives, her mother announces that we have to go to Mexico. We have to go to Mexico. I got a letter from the Mexico City Dead Letter Office. They've got Mother's ashes there. So the story behind that is that her mother, Bubbles' mother, had gone to Mexico City with her lover back in the 1920s. And this is a mother who had traveled from Portree, Isle of Skye to Canada to join her husband, from whom she'd been separated for many years. And she had her kids with her and so on. But she left that whole thing. She left her family, this mother of Bubbles, to go off with her lover. And she never returned to Canada. So anyway, so Bubbles, she insists that we've got to go get Mother's ashes. We can't leave her ashes there. So this begins then this journey, this from Canada, from Calgary to Mexico City. And on the way, they have some really, really interesting adventures.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, and also sex is a big part of my novels. I don't try to hide it because it's such a natural part of who we are as humans. It's such a driving force for everybody, whether you acknowledge it or not. And so, Bubbles at 90, she still is interested, and she tries telephone sex. She thinks that might work out fine for her. You were going to ask a question.
But I think that I love the way that you played with Bubbles and the age differences. And you also have done that with Tilly in two different books. She's at two different ages in the books. So what was your motivation to do that with that character?
Well, the reason I wrote the last novel, The Ripening, A Canadian Girl Grows Up, which features Tilly at a young age from between 3 until 18. The reason I wrote that novel is because Tilly is the main character in Free Fall, a divine comedy, which had been released prior to the ripening. And my publisher, Pinnell Publishing, had offered me a 3-book contract. And so I had a 3rd book that I needed to complete. And I thought, well, why not see who Tilly was as a girl? And that's what led me to write The Ripening.
That's great fun to play with that, with our characters, isn't it? To imagine what they were like at a time where you hadn't yet really imagined them, maybe, by going back and doing that prequel.
Yes. It was difficult because the older Tilly in Free Fall and Divine Comedy, she's wacky. She's an installation artist. She's still trying to make it as an artist. She's lived off grants and part-time jobs doing waitressing and etc., office work. But she's never really made it as an artist. And so she decides after a reunion with 3 old friends in Whistler, BC, she talks them into extending their reunion to one of the women's flats in Venice. And they do that. They decide to spend 3 weeks in Venice together, and they'll be celebrating their 60th birthdays there. And she's all during this time, unknown to them, she's planning to crash the Venice Biennale, and she does.
Your stories are both powerful and engaging in terms of age, but also in terms of an adventure. You have to tell our listeners and our watchers about Curva Pelagrosa, who shows up, oh my goodness, 2 parrots on her shoulder, gold teeth, trigger happy. Where did she come from in your brain?
Oh, tell me. She's still a mystery to me in so many ways. What started me out even thinking about writing this novel was an image, and often that happens for me. But in this case, I had read about a tornado. It's unfortunate to make it funny, given what's happening right now in Kentucky and other places with tornadoes. But I had read about a tornado hitting this small town in Alberta, and it just really gripped my imagination to think about how these lives were turned upside down and inside out. And in the midst of thinking about that, came then this image of the tornado. I mean, it actually starts with a tornado, with the tornado. And out of that, in those opening pages, this outhouse, this purple outhouse, lands in the center of Weed, Alberta, a fictitious town. And inside it is Curva Pelagrosa. And so when I first created that character, I wanted a woman really unlike me. But I wanted her to be powerful. I mean, she's over 6 foot tall. She can shoot better than any man. She ends up having to ride in rodeos on her way from southern Mexico, through the United States as she's making her pilgrimage to Canada, where she wants to compete in the Calgary Stampede Rodeo, which is a big deal for some people.
Very big deal.
Yeah. And so on the way, she's, competing as a man until her very last time doing this. And she exposes herself as a woman too. But, and so she also is very open about sex and very comfortable with it. And she liked these, I guess you'd call it a one-night stand, but for her it was, like a little marriage. And so she'd stop on her way and have, her times with men too. And she wasn't eager to get married. And so, she was really the antithesis of me. I have ridden horses when I was really young, of course. But she also smokes grass.
I love that you placed it in Weed, the name of the town. I just thought that was brilliant.
Weed, Alberta. And she makes, Weed, she makes these brownies and feeds her neighbors who don't quite know what it is that they're eating, but they know they feel really good afterwards. And so so she is sort of this force that comes out of the South. You could maybe, if you're thinking about it psychologically, she comes out of the unconscious, the deep unconscious, and surfaces in this very northern, directed town where the people are quite conservative, quite conventional, and she just shakes it up on all levels, and some of it is good, and some of it isn't so good, but and there are other factors too that come in there. I mean, I grew up being really conscious of the Native Canadians who lived on nearby reservations. Mm-hmm. And so there's a major male character is Billy One Eye, who's a Native, and he's the chief of this Blackfoot tribe. And he's also an artist. And the two of them end up getting together and have quite an interesting relationship. And I became really, really attached to him. He grounds Curva in major ways. And I think my stepfather probably grounded me in major ways too. I think maybe there might be some of my stepfather's traits coming out in Billy One Eye.
Well, I read somewhere that you said that you write to figure out what you're thinking, I think, or what your sense of life is. And I think that's so true for so many of us.
Yeah.
So tell me why storytelling? You have this vast array of experiences. Why storytelling for you, and why teach storytelling to others?
Well, what I'm teaching others it's telling their own stories. I teach memoir mainly. And it's such a privilege whenever I have the opportunity to read these narratives that my students write, and these are all older adults too. And it's extraordinary what they bring to the page. But the most important part of these classes isn't, getting feedback from me about their writing. That's important, but it's being able to share their stories with each other. And they're just hungry, not only to, present their own stories in these small groups, but also to hear the other people's stories. And I mean, we're made of stories. I think we walk out of narratives, from the beginning of our lives. We start our own narrative. And, you sort of, when you gave a little of my background, I was a high school dropout and lived on my own since I was 15 and so on. So that was the beginning of my story. And I'm still living out this story and still discovering. I mean, I don't really want the ending, but I know that there will be an ending, and I'm approaching that. And so I'm learning how I'm going to be in my later years too. So that story is still evolving for me. So we are stories. We are stories.
Oh, I couldn't agree with you more. I have a tagline to my book, and it's when our stories are told, everything changes. And it's that concept of just learning to listen to each other and honoring each other's stories, which I think is so important. But there were many paths you could have chosen. Why did you choose the path of writing novels and poetry?
Well, I'm not so sure there were many paths I could have chosen, because when I was 25, I was working as a customer service representative for Olston Services, temporary health service in San Francisco, and I was sharing a ride back and forth with a fellow worker. And I was, telling her about my life up until then, and she was saying, you should really write about this. And I still get shivers when I remember this. It's such a vivid memory of me saying, I want to be a writer someday. And I sort of looked around and thought, where did this come from? Here I was, high school dropout. I wasn't writing except for diary, entries. But there was something in me that had to get out. that is a writer, and if I don't write regularly, it's like not eating. It's for me, it's food and nourishment. I have to do it. So I
And
don't
you journal quite a bit. Journaling was a vehicle for you to move into this work.
very much, yes, all throughout my life. I mean, right at the moment, I have stacks of journals that I've started going through from my earliest, years in my 20s up until now. And so I have a lot of reading to do ahead of me, just to go back and review this life, that I've been living. And I lived it so richly in these journals, so extensively. I'm amazed. So, yeah.
Well, and that really carries over into your writing as well. So we're almost on our time together. Tell our listeners something quirky about yourself that they might not find in all of their research of finding more about Lily Iona MacKenzie.
Quirky. Well, there are a lot of quirky things. I don't know how quirky to get.
Moderately quirky.
Yeah. Well, I think readers may not realize that I'm a sports fan, and I played tennis when I was younger until I ruined my knees, and I absolutely adore watching tennis and these tremendous tennis players, and their skills are just outstanding. So I don't know if that's quirky, but maybe a reader or someone might not expect that of me, because I also am really spiritual and inward. So yeah, I love baseball. I love the San Francisco Giants. So.
Well, those are two things that we didn't know about you, and you've had an amazing journey, and I'm so glad you shared it with us today. Where can people find out more about you? Where can they find your fabulous books and poetry?
Well, I love visitors to my blog, and each Monday, this is Monday, I still haven't done my Monday blog post, but each Monday I post something about reading or writing, and all you have to do is search for Lily Iona MacKenzie, just LILYIONAMACKENZIE.com, and you'll arrive at my blog, and all of my books are available on Amazon too, and Barnes and Noble. Yeah.
Well, this is wonderful. I'm so glad you came and shared your time on the microphone with me here at the Storytellers. This is a copyrighted episode of the Storytellers by Authors on the Air, Global Radio Network, and Grace Sammon. Lily, thanks so much for being with me.
Well, and thank you for
Jessica Barnett. That concludes this episode of the Storytellers. I'm so glad you could be part of the story today. I hope you share the stories, tell your own, and come back for another episode, because when our stories are told, everything changes. I'm Grace Sammon.